Dr. Harrison froze. His steady hand, honed by years of medical practice, faltered. The needle, loaded with the last dose, hovered inches above the frail body sprawled on the cold metal table. Silence in the room, save for the weak, labored breathing of the dog before him. Story comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. A stray, unwanted, left to die. But as Dr. Harrison stared into those eyes, those deep, soulful, haunting eyes, he saw something he had never seen before. Not just fear, not just pain, but a message, a plea. And that's when it happened. 12 hours earlier. It had been raining all that night. It rained, so cold and unfeeling, and all the streets were empty, a slow chill drenching everything visible. The normally bustling city had ground to a halt as people stayed indoors away from the tempest. But not him. A skeletal dog lay curled up in a dark alley. His fur was filthy, his ribs jutting sharply out of his gaunt body. The storm stormed on, but he did not move. Couldn't move. He had given up. For weeks, he had roamed these streets, searching, hoping. On his knees, begging for a scrap of kindness. But kindness had never come. Until now. A woman ran through the alley, soaked from head to toe, panting from exertion. She had been looking for him. Emily. She'd seen him before, many times. Too far away, always too skittish. But tonight, it felt different. Tonight, he didn't run. She knelt at his side, wavering before extending a hand. "Hey, buddy." Her sentence broke and she could barely whisper. "It's okay, you're not alone anymore." His breathing was ragged, shallow, but then his tail moved. Just barely. A flicker. A sign of life. And that was all Emily ever needed. She didn't think, she acted. Her hands trembling, she scooped him up and ran. Through the rain, through empty streets, through the suffocating silence of the night. He was dying. She had witnessed it one too many times. Dogs left to die, their bodies deteriorating before anyone even realized they were alive. But not this time. Not him. The clinic's doors flung open as she staggered through them, breathless. "Help! He's not breathing right. Please!" Dr. Harrison looked up from his desk, his eyes moving over the trembling woman and the lifeless dog she held. He sighed. "Another one?" Emily placed the dog on the examination table, then stepped back for the vet to examine him. It felt as if every second was infinite. And then the words she had dreaded arrived. "He's too far gone." Her heart stopped. "What?" Dr. Harrison straightened, his voice steady but firm. "This dog is suffering. The most humane thing we can do is let him go." Emily's vision blurred. "No, you don't understand. He's a fighter. He just needs a chance. Emily." His voice softened. "Look at him. He can't even lift his head. Fists clenched in her hands. You don't know that. He's still here. He's still breathing." Dr. Harrison sighed again. He hated this part. He reached for the needle. So, just as he was poised to give the dose, the dog moved. Not just a twitch. Not just a flicker. He lifted his head. His eyelids, barely open, focused on the vet's. And then, against all odds, against the hurt, against the fatigue, he licked his hand. Dr. Harrison froze. Emily's breath hitched. And for the first time in years, Dr. Harrison had a feeling he hadn't had in a long time. Doubt. For weeks, he was just a dead husk in the streets. Another stray nobody cared about. But now, on a cold, sterile table, surrounded by people who had long since given up on him, he wouldn't give up on himself. The needle was mere inches from his frail body. Everyone froze in place, the gravity of the moment weighing down upon them like the air in a parachute. Dr. Harrison's hand trembled, something no one ever saw. Emily gasped. "Did you see that? He moved. He's still fighting." Max's body was weak. It could scarcely hold up his head, but his eyes, they screamed what no one could possibly ignore. Not yet. Dr. Harrison swallowed hard. His whole career had been based on logic, experience, and tough calls. He had seen this case too many times. Dogs on the edge of death, their bodies failing them before their hearts were ready. And each time, he had been the one to make the call. Every time he had spared them their suffering. But this time, it felt different. Max's tongue against his hand was cold and sent a shiver through him. This wasn't just reflex. This was intentional. The vet paused, his mind racing. If he didn't do something now, the dog would suffer further. But if he was wrong, if there was even the slightest chance, could he live with himself, taking away that opportunity? Emily's voice shattered the silence and shook with desperation. "Please, just try. Give him a chance. That's all I ask." Dr. Harrison took a sharp breath, his mind waging war with itself. All his instincts as a physician said this dog wasn't going to make it. But then, Max did something different. Something that made the decision for him. The sickly dog, hardly holding on, maneuvered his paw ever so slightly, so that it rested on Emily's hand. It was the weakest, most vulnerable movement. But it had a message that words could not convey. He wasn't ready to go. Emily's eyes teared up. Dr. Harrison glanced between the two of them, the woman who would not quit, and the dog who had more fight left in him than anyone thought. He exhaled, covering his face with his fingers. Then, without saying another word, he walked away from the euthanasia kit and picked up a different set of tools. Emily's throat constricted with disbelief. "Wait, does this mean—" Dr. Harrison nodded. "We're going to try, but I can't promise anything." A glimmer of hope flickered in the room for the first time in hours. But rescuing Max wasn't going to be simple, because the real battle was only beginning. Dr. Harrison had a sharp, urgent voice. Emily's heart raced as she stared at Max's weak form shaking on the table. He had just shown the world moments earlier he was not ready to quit. But now, as his body thrashed under the unforgiving clinic lights, it looked like he was losing the battle after all. Dr. Harrison was quick, his hands moving with precision. He connected Max to the oxygen machine, maneuvering the mask over his small snout. His ribs heaved up and down, desperate to pull in every breath. Emily gripped the edge of the table, her nails biting into the metal. "Come on, buddy. You're stronger than this." But the vet's face was grim. His vitals are weak. And unless we're able to stabilize him in the next few minutes, we're going to lose him. A chill dread lodged in Emily's throat. She would not accept that after all of this. After all the fighting Max had done, this was how it ended. Not today. Not like this. She dropped down by the boy's side, crooning. "I know you can hear me, Max. You have fought your entire life. You survived the streets, the cold, the hunger. Don't stop now. Please." Dr. Harrison hardly looked at her. His hands did not shake, but his brain was hemorrhaging. Max's blood pressure had begun dropping. His breath came in shallower gasps. The machine emitted a sudden sharp beeping, a warning. Emily's stomach twisted. And then, it happened. Max's paw twitched. Just the slightest movement. Emily gasped, eyes widening. "Dr. Harrison, he's trying." The vet paused for a millisecond only to refocus. "I need to get him on fluids. If we don't get some strength back into his body, we're going to lose him for real." He picked up a syringe and fitted it to an IV line. A clean needle penetrated Max's fragile skin, and a steady stream of vital fluid started to flow into his system. But Max wasn't out of the woods yet. His breathing was erratic, his heartbeat unstable. The room was deathly silent except for the rhythmic beeps of the monitor and the teetering of the wall clock. Seconds felt like hours. And then, a change. Max's shallow breaths became slightly steadier. His heart, weak and fluttering, resumed its rhythm. Emily's lips parted in shock. He was stabilizing. Dr. Harrison exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He wiped his forehead, nodding at himself. Okay, that's a start. Tears filled Emily's eyes. He's going to make it? Dr. Harrison paused before responding. It's too soon to tell. His body is still weak. The next 24 hours will determine everything. 24 hours. Max needed to make it the next 24 hours. Emily drew a deep breath and extended her hand to lightly caress Max's fur. Then I'll stay with him. Dr. Harrison stared at her, his expression blank. Then, without a word, he nodded. And so it was that as night fell over the clinic, Emily prepared for the longest wait of her life. She had rescued Max from the streets. Now she had to rescue him from fate itself. Her voice was little more than a whisper. She had been there for hours, watching every slow, unsteady breath Max took, terrified it might be his last. Dr. Harrison had been clear. The next 24 hours would tell the tale. Emily looked over to the clock on the wall. 3:47 a.m. The clinic was silent, but her mind wasn't. She had seen cases like this before. Dogs removed from the streets, mere remnants of themselves, struggling with every scrap of life they had remaining. Some survived. Most didn't. But Max was different. She had seen it in his eyes. Even when his body was failing him, his soul did not give in. But now, listening to his shallow breaths fill the vacant space around her, that same fear returned to settle in her heart. What if it wasn't enough? Emily shut her eyes, fighting the lump in her throat. She had vowed she would not cry. Not yet. Not until she was sure she had done everything she could. Then, a sharp, sudden beep broke the silence. Her heart stopped. She glanced at the monitor. Max's heart rate had unexpectedly dipped. No. She leapt from her chair, shaking hands pressed lightly against Max's body. He wasn't breathing. The door flung open, and Dr. Harrison burst in, his face bloodless with urgency. What happened? He just stopped breathing. He was stable, and then, move. Dr. Harrison lunged for an oxygen mask, which he pressed over Max's tiny snout as Emily stumbled backward. Stay with me, buddy. His voice was steady but pleading. Don't you dare give up now. The heart monitor emitted another agonizing beep, then another, and another. But then, silence. No beeping, no breathing, nothing. Emily felt her knees go weak. This was it. This was the moment she had dreaded all along. Max had done the best that he could, but ultimately, it wasn't enough. Dr. Harrison ground his teeth. He knew what came next. The fight was over. He turned to the monitor to confirm the time of death, and then Max gasped. A ruptured, laboring a gasp. Emily gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Dr. Harrison froze, widening his eyes. Impossible. But it was happening. Max's chest rose and fell. His emaciated form, moments earlier lifeless, trembled back to life. Emily's heart was racing. Tears stung at the corners of her eyes as she viewed the impossible before her. Dr. Harrison was incredulous. I don't understand. His heart stopped. He was gone. Emily wiped her face with trembling hands, laughing amid tears. He's not gone. He's a fighter." Dr. Harrison's face softened when he looked down at the dog that had just challenged everything he knew about medicine. There was another beep from the heart monitor. Then another, and another. Steady. Stronger. Emily released a breath she hadn't known she was holding. Max had come back, but he was still not out of the woods. Dr. Harrison tightened the oxygen mask and checked his vitals. He's stable for now, but I don't know how much longer he can sustain this. "Are you Emily?" she asked, nodding, her voice still sort of shaken. "Then I'll be here, no matter what." The vet regarded her for a long moment. Then, for the first time since she had brought Max into the clinic, he smiled. "He's lucky to have you." Emily shook her head. I'm the lucky one." She glanced down at Max, his little chest rising and falling under her fingers. She didn't know what to expect over the next few hours. But one thing was clear. Max had just shown that he was far from through fighting. Dr. Harrison's voice was soft, almost to himself. He stood above Max, the contours of his fragile body drawn under a stony face. The dog had returned from the jaws of death. That in itself was a miracle, but there was a detail that wasn't adding up. The scars slashing across his back, the way the rib bones protruded unnaturally beneath the skin, the patches of fur stained and faded. This was not the work of an ordinary stray who'd been starving. Max had experienced something much worse, something intentional. Dr. Harrison let out a breath, rubbing his temples. He had practiced as a vet for more than 15 years. He had witnessed dogs hit by cars, discarded in dumpsters left to freeze. But this looked like abuse. Emily stirred next to Max, fingers reaching out, rubbing his fur. Not even in sleep would she let go. Dr. Harrison hesitated. Emily had done everything for Max that she could do. But if Max was someone's, if someone had done this to him, what then? Would they come searching for him? Would she have to let him go? The thought sent his stomach churning. He had to find out the truth. Hours later, the clinic room was lit by the morning light coming through the windows. Emily sat up, stretching and groaning. Her entire body ached. She had barely slept. But the instant she saw Max still breathing, his little chest rising and falling, relief came over her like a wave. She reached out and ran a hand over his head. "Hey, tough guy, you're still with me." Max twitched his ears a little but didn't open his eyes. He was exhausted. So was she. Before she could say anything else, the door creaked open. Dr. Harrison came into the room, a strange expression on him. Emily frowned. "What is it?" He hesitated, then sighed. "I ran a scan on Max last night, just to make sure there were no internal injuries." Emily's stomach clenched. "And?" He displayed an X-ray film and traced a finger along the edge of a small, metallic object adjacent to Max's left shoulder blade. "A microchip." Emily's heart stopped. Max had an owner. A pit formed in her stomach. No, that's not right. That can't be right. She hardly raised her voice above a whisper. He was abandoned. He couldn't have a home. Dr. Harrison sighed, putting the film down. "I don't have the whole story yet. But then, if he was microchipped, that means he was at one time someone's dog." Emily's pulse raced. Her head spun with questions. If Max had an owner, where were they? What was he doing starving on the streets? Why was he covered in scars? Then the worst thing crossed her mind. Imagine if this had happened to Max's owner. The room felt suffocating. Dr. Harrison studied her closely. "Emily, you know what this means. Legally speaking, if somebody comes forward who is his owner, we may have to return him." Her breath caught. No, she had just saved him. She had just promised him a new life. She couldn't lose him now. Her voice was raw. "You're going to verify the chip, aren't you?" Dr. Harrison hesitated. "I have to." Emily looked back at Max, her trembling hands resting on his small body. She had struggled to keep him alive for so long, but what if she had to battle to stay with him at all? She took a deep breath, swallowed, willed herself to breathe. "Then, we'd better hope his owner never calls on the phone." The monotone of a tiny beep reverberated in the sterile chamber. Emily's stomach churned with knots. It was like standing on the precipice of a cliff, waiting to see what ground underneath her would crumble. Dr. Harrison's eyes danced across the screen. Then he stopped. His face hardened. Emily noticed immediately. "What is it?" She barely murmured the words above a whisper. Dr. Harrison did not respond immediately. His brow knitted together, his jaw stiffening. He clicked something on the screen and skimmed the details. Then finally, he exhaled. Max wasn't astray. Emily's breath caught. She knew that already. But the way Dr. Harrison said it, somehow, there was something more. He adjusted the screen so she could see. "His real name is Tyson." Emily stared. The name felt foreign, wrong, maximum. That's who he was. Dr. Harrison continued. He belonged to someone and not just anyone. Emily swallowed hard. "Who?" Dr. Harrison paused, then replied, "Someone by the name of Richard Callaway." The name gave her a chill down her back. She had heard it before, and not in a good way. 3 years ago. "This one's a fighter," a voice said behind her. She turned around and found another volunteer, an older woman with tired eyes and a knowing smirk. She dropped to her knees, resting her hand on the cage. The puppy pushed her fingers with its nose. "Where did he come from?" The woman's smile faded. "Animal control took him from Callaway's property." Emily's stomach twisted. She knew the name. Richard Callaway was a notorious figure in their town. A breeder, a trainer, a man who operated a so-called guard dog training facility. In reality, it was something far darker. There had been rumors. Fights, abuse, dogs disappearing, but nothing was ever proven. And the dogs who made it out? They were broken. Emily glanced at the puppy in the cage. She remembered thinking, "This one's lucky." But now, here, in Dr. Harrison's office, looking at the screen, she realized that she had been mistaken, because Max wasn't lucky. He had gone back. Present day. Emily clutched the edge of the desk and her hands shook. It can't be him. Dr. Harrison's face was grim. "It is. And by this record, he's still technically the owner." Emily shook her head. No, he left Max to die. He starved him. Her voice broke. Dr. Harrison sighed and rubbed the back of his neck. "We have no idea what happened." Emily's voice was sharp. "I do." Pieces were coming together in her mind. The scars on Max's back. How he flinched when a loud sound went off. The look of fear in his eyes the first time he woke. Max had been hurt before, and she was not going to let it happen again. Dr. Harrison hesitated. "Maybe you get him legally, but if Callaway wants him back, Emily bashed her hands against the desk. "No." Dr. Harrison blinked. Emily's voice trembled with fury. "If he comes for Max, I swear to God, I'm going to up against him with everything I've got." The room was silent. Then, a soft sound. Emily yanked, as did Dr. Harrison. Max had whimpered. He was waking up. Emily sprinted to his side and felt his fur with her fingers. They opened just a little, his eyes weak. He looked at her, not in fear, not in pain, but in trust. And in that moment, Emily understood. She was not going to allow Richard Callaway to reclaim him, no matter what it took. The phone stopped ringing. An awkward silence descended upon the room. Dr. Harrison leaned in, alternating his eyes between the screen and Emily. He hovered his fingers over the keyboard. "I can dig, but Emily, if Callaway has a live claim on Max, we may not get to decide." Emily's stomach twisted. There's always a choice. Dr. Harrison hesitated. He had known Emily for years. He had watched her advocate for animals nobody else would. But this? It wasn't merely a case of saving and rehabilitating. This was a war, and the enemy? That's where man was never meant to be. Elsewhere. "This is Callaway." A pause. Then, "Sir, we got a hit on the dog." The cell phone was tightened more. Richard Callaway leaned forward, his jaw tightening. "Where?" Back at the clinic, every second ticked by like a distant drum roll in Emily's mind. Max was still too weak to move much, but his eyes were open now. They darted from her to Dr. Harrison, as if he sensed something was up. Her fingers skimmed over his fur. He didn't flinch this time. Progress. She glanced up at Dr. Harrison. "What do we do?" The vet sighed. "Legally? If he comes to take Max away, I don't know if we can stop him." Emily's breath caught. Dr. Harrison hesitated for a moment and then moved in close and lowered his voice. "But ethically?" His eyes darkened. "We stall. We figure something out, because I have a bad feeling about this guy." Emily swallowed. "You have no idea how much of it is true." She took a deep breath. "Richard Callaway isn't a careless owner, Harrison. He's a monster." Dr. Harrison's brow furrowed. "You know him." Emily nodded slowly. "Not personally, but I know what he's done." She stood pacing, her thoughts bleeding into her stories. Callaway didn't only breed dogs, he trained them. He broke them. She turned back to Max, her heart breaking. He's the one that made Max like this. The scars, the fear. He did this to him. Dr. Harrison exhaled sharply. "And then we can't allow him to take him back." Emily nodded. "Agreed." But before either of them could speak again, the front door to the clinic swung open. Heavy boots stamped down the long, empty hall. Max's body went rigid against Emily's hand. He knew that sound. Something moved by the frosted glass window. Then, a voice. Deep, cold, familiar. "I'm here for my dog." Then, knock, knock, knock. Shots ringing out like a ticking clock. Emily felt her heart thump against her ribcage. Dr. Harrison shot her a look. "Whatever happens, keep your cool." Stay calm? The man who had tortured Max was 5 feet away. Sure, how was she going to stay calm? She paused, fists clenched, medicating her voice with calm. "Who is it?" Silence. Then, "I know you have my dog." It was a deep, cold voice, one laced with quiet authority. Emily's stomach twisted. He said, "My dog. Not Max, not Tyson. Mine." Dr. Harrison stepped in, unlocked but didn't open the door. Dim fluorescent light from the hallway spilled in, and a towering figure blocked the doorway. Richard Callaway. He looked just the way she remembered. Tall, broad-shouldered, blue eyes that missed nothing, sharp as glass. He had a scar running along his jawline that made him look almost inhuman. But the worst part? He was smiling. Dr. Harrison coughed and cleared his throat. "This is a veterinary clinic. We don't let animals go without that verification." Callaway took a low chuckle. "Verification?" He dipped into his coat pocket and pulled out a piece of folded paper. "You mean like this?" Dr. Harrison opened it, spreading it out slowly. Emily leaned in, reading the printed text. Her blood turned ice cold. A certificate of ownership of the asset in question. Signed, stamped, legit. Emily swallowed hard. You abandoned him." Her voice was tight, hitching on the edge of control. "He was living on the streets and starving, dying." Callaway barely blinked. "That doesn't concern you." Her hands balled into fists. "The hell it isn't." Dr. Harrison shot her a warning look, then turned back to Callaway. "This establishes ownership legally, but on ethical grounds, we have worries. This was a malnourished, injured dog." Callaway moved in closer, towering over both of them. "And you a cop, Doc?" Dr. Harrison didn't flinch. But I am a licensed veterinarian, and I have a legal obligation to report suspected animal cruelty." Callaway's feigned politeness cracked the first time. Something dark flashed in his face, and just as fast, it was over. That smile returned. "Abuse?" Callaway scoffed. "That dog is a working animal that is trained. He was injured in the field. He slipped off my radar, but now he's on it again. That's all there is to it." Before she could stop herself, Emily stepped forward. "You're lying." Callaway cocked his head slightly, as if he were being entertained. Then his eyes darted over her shoulder, to the exam table, toward Max. A slow, near-predatory smile spread across his mouth. Tyson. Max flinched. It was small, barely noticeable. But Emily saw it. And so did Callaway. His smile grew wider. Rage coursed through Emily's veins. This man, this monster, had abandoned Max to die. He thought he could just walk back in and take him now, over her dead body. But Callaway spoke again, and his words sent a chill up her spine. "You have no idea how much that dog is worth." Emily's pulse raced. "What?" Callaway stood tall, shaking imaginary dust from his coat. "I'll be back for him." Dr. Harrison squinted his eyes. "And if we refuse?" Callaway laughed and shook his head. Doc, you're a smart man. You know how this works." He was facing Emily, his eyes meeting hers. "The law is on my side. If I want him, I'll get him. One way or another." Silence. Then he took one step back, then another. He left without another word. Emily's whole body felt as though it had been splashed with ice water. She turned to Dr. Harrison. "We can't let him take Max." Dr. Harrison nodded. "I know." Emily glanced back at the exam table. Max had tensed and hunched his shoulders, his eyes fixed on the door, as if the devil had just entered through it. Because maybe he had. Emily approached and knelt next to him. "I won't let him take you. I swear it." Max didn't move. But then, ever so slightly, his tail thumped. A silent thank you. Emily's heart ached, because she had just made a vow, and she had no clue how she would hold on to it. The air in the clinic felt heavy, like every bit of the tension that had just unfolded was absorbed by the walls. Dr. Harrison finally spoke. "He's not done." Emily swallowed, her throat scratchy and dry. "I know." Because Callaway was the kind of man who didn't walk away. He came back, again and again, until he got what he wanted. And right now, he wanted Max. Emily turned to the feeble dog on the exam table. His whole body was tight, ears pinned, tail jammed hard against his body. He wasn't shaking. He was frozen. That was worse. Shaking meant fear. Freezing meant trauma. Her stomach twisted. Max knew. He knew Callaway was returning. Dr. Harrison rubbed his jaw, exhaling loudly. "Legally, I can stall, say that he's not medically cleared yet." Emily nodded. "That buys us time. But then what?" Dr. Harrison hesitated. He didn't have an answer. Emily's fingers twisted into the fabric of her jeans. She needed time to think. She needed to act. Because if Callaway returned, if he discovered a way to have Max legally, she didn't know what she would do. She rotated towards Dr. Harrison, keeping her voice low. "What if we move him?" Dr. Harrison frowned. Move him. Emily stood with her arms crossed. If Callaway's watching this place, and let's be honest, he likely is, Max isn't safe here. Dr. Harrison massaged his temples. Emily, this isn't a spy movie. We're not going to just smuggle a dog out of here and no one would notice. She knew that. But she also knew that to leave Max here was a death sentence. She broke her gaze back to Max, and her heart twisted at the sight of him curled into himself. He needed a way out. Dr. Harrison sighed and brushed his hair back. We need proof, Emily. She blinked. What? He pointed at Max. Evidence that Callaway had abused him. We can delay, but if we're going to challenge this in court, we have to have something substantial. Emily paused for a moment, then shook her head. We already have proof. She nodded in the direction of Max's scars, his gnarled, malnourished body. He was abandoned, left to die, starved. Isn't that enough? Dr. Harrison sighed. It should be, but they both knew it wasn't. Not legally, not against a man like Callaway. Emily clenched her jaw. Then I'll find something. Dr. Harrison eyed her warily. Emily. She didn't allow him a moment to protest. If Callaway thinks he's going to get Max back, he's about to make a mistake. And I'll be there for him when he does. Dr. Harrison exhaled sharply. This is dangerous. Emily's eyes darkened. So is he. A silence fell between them, taut with attention. Then, Max let out a soft whimper. Emily turned his direction. His feeble body convulsed, and then his eyes met hers. And for the first time, he extended toward her, not away, not in fear, but in trust. Her breath caught. It was small, a tiny, fragile movement. But it was enough. She swallowed hard, stroking the fur around his neck. I won't let him take you. She meant it, even if that put her in Callaway's crosshairs. A voice crackles back on the other end. You sure it's him? Callaway sneered, puffing out a cloud of smoke. I never forget my own dogs. The voice hesitated. And the girl? Callaway's eyes darkened. She's in my way. A long pause. Then, what do you want us to do? Callaway tossed his cigarette out the window. Wait. His fingertips drummed on the steering wheel. Then, with a smile, slow and deliberate, she'll come to us. Emily's stomach churned. This man was no mere dog owner. He was profiting from them. And if Max was one of his, that meant he had been trained, conditioned, become something he never wanted to be. She kept scrolling. Then, a news article piqued her interest. Hiding the truth? Undercover investigation, this trainer. Emily clicked. Her eyes flitted across the page, faster and faster. It was an Inside Informer report. Anonymous sources. Employees who had quit. People who said they had seen things. Dogs driven past their breaking point. Dogs beaten, starved, trained until they broke. Some of them didn't survive. Her fists balled into knots. She scrolled further. There was a video. Her mouse hovered over it. She paused. Did she really want to watch this? Then she clicked. The screen blacked out briefly. Then grainy footage appeared. A concrete training yard, fences, bright overhead lights, and in the middle of it, a German shepherd. Skin and bones, panting. Weak. A voice out of frame barked a command. The dog flinched, hesitated. Then came the activation of a shock collar. Emily recoiled from the screen, her heart was plummeting against her ribs. Her vision blurred with rage. This was what Callaway did. This was Max's escape from the place he had run from. She slammed the laptop shut. This was enough. She had proof. But what was proof if Max wasn't safe? His phone buzzes. He glances at the screen. An unknown number. He smirks. Right on time. He answers. Yeah. A voice on the other end. She's looking into you. Callaway's smirk widens. Good. Let her. He ditches the cigarette out the window. She is playing right into my hands. Back at the clinic, Emily slumped in through the doors, laptop stuffed under her arm. I found something. Dr. Harrison glanced up as he checked Max's vitals. Emily, slow down. I said I found something. She popped open the laptop and called up the video. This is how he treats them. Dr. Harrison's jaw clenched as he watched. The video ended. Silence. Then he exhaled. This is bad. Emily nodded. Yeah, and it's going to get worse. Dr. Harrison rubbed his face. Emily, if Callaway understands you're probing into him, he already knows. Dr. Harrison's head jerked up. Emily swallowed hard. He's coming back, Harrison, and he isn't going anywhere without Max. A long pause. Dr. Harrison straightened then. Then we have to move first. Emily blinked. What? Dr. Harrison's eyes darkened. You said it yourself. If Max stays here, he's dead. So we get him out. Emily's stomach twisted. And go where? Dr. Harrison sighed. Somewhere he can't find us. Max stood below Emily and her heart broke. She didn't care what it took. She would protect him, even if it meant running. A car pulls up. Someone speaks into the phone. They're moving him. A pause. Then Callaway's voice at the other end. Emily's voice was tight. Do you think he knows? Dr. Harrison stared at the road ahead of him. I'd be shocked if he didn't. Emily swallowed hard, looking at the sleeping dog next to her. Then we don't have very much time. Dr. Harrison nodded, tightening his grip on the steering wheel. We need to get out of town, lay low. Emily clenched her jaw. Where? Dr. Harrison paused and breathed out. There's an old cabin, family place. It's isolated. No one will find us there. Emily nodded, heart pounding in her ears. They had one chance. They needed to vanish before Callaway caught up to them. They're heading north. A voice crackled through on the other end. Stay on them. The man smirked. They won't even know I'm around. Emily continued looking out the window, paranoia inching its way up her chest. Everything felt wrong. Too easy. Dr. Harrison noticed. Emily, talk to me. She hesitated. I feel like we're under surveillance. Dr. Harrison frowned. I don't see anyone. Neither did she. That didn't mean they weren't there, though. She faced Max again, sweeping her fingers through his fur. He was still weak, still recovering. They could not afford to be caught. Then, a set of headlights flickered in the distance. Emily stiffened. Dr. Harrison's eyes darted to the rearview mirror. That car has been behind us too long. Emily's stomach twisted. It's him. Dr. Harrison's hands gripped the wheel. Hold on. Then he stomped his foot on the gas. The man himself did not budge, and the truck barreled ahead, its tires screaming against the pavement. The headlights behind began to accelerate. Emily's heart raced in her throat. He's chasing us! Dr. Harrison clenched his teeth. We'll lose him. The road ahead was dark, winding, with no signs of life in thick forest on either side. Dr. Harrison made a hard turn, tires screeching, the truck barely keeping the road. But the car behind them? Still there, still gaining. Emily was gasping for air. He's not letting us go. This man was no mere dog owner. He was profiting from them. And if Max was one of his, that meant he had been trained, conditioned, become something he never wanted to be. She kept scrolling. Then, a news article piqued her interest. Hiding the truth? Undercover investigation, this trainer. Emily clicked. Her eyes flitted across the page, faster and faster. It was an Inside Informer report. Anonymous sources. Employees who had quit. People who said they had seen things. Dogs driven past their breaking point. Dogs beaten, starved, trained until they broke. Some of them didn't survive. Her fists balled into knots. She scrolled further. There was a video. Her mouse hovered over it. She paused. Did she really want to watch this? Then she clicked. The screen blacked out briefly. Then grainy footage appeared. A concrete training yard, fences, bright overhead lights, and in the middle of it, a German shepherd. Skin and bones, panting. Weak. A voice out of frame barked a command. The dog flinched, hesitated. Then came the activation of a shock collar. Emily recoiled from the screen. Her heart was plummeting against her ribs. Her vision blurred with rage. This was what Callaway did. This was Max's escape from the place he had run from. She slammed the laptop shut. This was enough. She had proof. But what was proof if Max wasn't safe? His phone buzzes. He glances at the screen. An unknown number. He smirks. "Right on time," he answers. "Yeah." A voice on the other end. "She's looking into you." Callaway's smirk widens. "Good. Let her." He ditches the cigarette out the window. "She is playing right into my hands." Back at the clinic, Emily slumped in through the doors, laptop stuffed under her arm. "I found something." Dr. Harrison glanced up as he checked Max's vitals. "Emily, slow down." "I said I found something." She popped open the laptop and called up the video. This is how he treats them. Dr. Harrison's jaw clenched as he watched. The video ended. Silence. Then he exhaled. "This is bad." Emily nodded. "Yeah, and it's going to get worse." Dr. Harrison rubbed his face. "Emily, if Callaway understands you're probing into him, he already knows." Dr. Harrison's head jerked up. Emily swallowed hard. "He's coming back, Harrison, and he isn't going anywhere without Max." A long pause. Dr. Harrison straightened then. "Then we have to move first." Emily blinked. "What?" Dr. Harrison's eyes darkened. "You said it yourself. If Max stays here, he's dead. So we get him out." Emily's stomach twisted. "And go where?" Dr. Harrison sighed. "Somewhere he can't find us." Max stood below Emily and her heart broke. She didn't care what it took. She would protect him, even if it meant running. A car pulls up. Someone speaks into the phone. "They're moving him." A pause. Then Callaway's voice at the other end. Emily's voice was tight. "Do you think he knows?" Dr. Harrison stared at the road ahead of him. "I'd be shocked if he didn't." Emily swallowed hard, looking at the sleeping dog next to her. "Then we don't have very much time." Dr. Harrison nodded, tightening his grip on the steering wheel. "We need to get out of town, lay low." Emily clenched her jaw. "Where?" Dr. Harrison paused and breathed out. "There's an old cabin, family place. It's isolated. No one will find us there." Emily nodded, heart pounding in her ears. They had one chance. They needed to vanish before Callaway caught up to them. They're heading north. A voice crackled through on the other end. "Stay on them." The man smirked. "They won't even know I'm around." Emily continued looking out the window, paranoia inching its way up her chest. Everything felt wrong. Too easy. Dr. Harrison noticed. "Emily, talk to me." She hesitated. I feel like we're under surveillance." Dr. Harrison frowned. "I don't see anyone." Neither did she. That didn't mean they weren't there, though. She faced Max again, sweeping her fingers through his fur. He was still weak, still recovering. They could not afford to be caught. Then, a set of headlights flickered in the distance. Emily stiffened. Dr. Harrison's eyes darted to the rearview mirror. "That car has been behind us too long." Emily's stomach twisted. "It's him." Dr. Harrison's hands gripped the wheel. "Hold on." Then he stomped his foot on the gas. The man himself did not budge, and the truck barreled ahead, its tires screaming against the pavement. The headlights behind began to accelerate. Emily's heart raced in her throat. "He's chasing us!" Dr. Harrison clenched his teeth. "We'll lose him." The road ahead was dark, winding, with no signs of life in thick forest on either side. Dr. Harrison made a hard turn, tires screeching, the truck barely keeping the road. But the car behind them? Still there, still gaining. Emily was gasping for air. "He's not letting us go." Dr. Harrison's eyes darkened. Then, "We don't stop." The road took a sharp curve just ahead. Too sharp, too steep. Dr. Harrison's jaw clenched. This is it. Hold on to something. Emily had time to pay the rest of the bill, put the 2 from 2 on the table, and start registering the customers, but that was about it. Before the truck exited the Pub Dock Lodge parking lot, hit the curve way too fast, and slammed into the vehicle they were in. Skid, jerk, the rear wheels lifted ever so slightly off the ground. Max whimpered. Emily screamed. Dr. Harrison struggled for control, cranking the wheel sharply. Then the truck landed hard, tires screeching, dust billowing. Emily clutched her chest, gasping for air. They had barely made it. She turned. The car behind them didn't. Crash! The sickening sound of metal twisting, tires screeching. Emily gasped, caught in her own throat. The shot plunged the car off the road, down a steep bank and into the trees, then silence. Emily's hands trembled. Dr. Harrison's knuckles were white on the wheel. Did we just... Before she could finish, a shadow lurched into the road. Emily's heart stopped. It wasn't over. The driver, Callaway's man, was still breathing, and he was heading right for them, a gun in his hand. Emily's blood ran cold. Dr. Harrison's voice was deadly quiet. "Emily, don't move." The man lifted the gun. A second passed, then another. Then Max moved. His frail body, his quaking legs, he forced himself upright. Emily's breath hitched. "Max, no!" But he wasn't afraid anymore. He was protecting her. A low, rumbling growl came from his chest. Then, despite his exhaustion, he lunged. The screen comes alive. Emily's eyes are wide, her breath caught in her chest, horrified. For a brief moment, time freezes. Max is airborne, his weak body leaping at the armed man. The man's gun jerks up from the jolt's impact. Then, bang! A sickening thud. Max hits the ground hard. Emily screams, "No!" Her whole world breaks as she sees Max fall. Dr. Harrison makes the first move, instinct taking over. He lunges forward and upon the armed man with all the muscle he can muster. The gun cascades to the pavement. The man falters, reeling, but only for a beat. Then he seizes Harrison by the throat. Emily's hands tremble, her head racing. Maximum, the gun. Harrison. She had seconds to act. Her eyes dart down, the gun. She lunges before she can think. Her hand curls around the frigid metal. The man sees her too late. Emily swings. Crack. The butt of the weapon slams into the side of his head. The man stumbles back, dazed. Dr. Harrison heaves, stumbling away. "Run, Emily!" But she doesn't. She turns. Her hands tremble and she drops the gun and hurries to Max. Emily kneels beside him with her hands already on his body. "Max, Max, please." He's breathing, but barely. Her trembling fingers dig into his side. Blood. Her vision blurs. "No, no, no!" Max's eyes flicker open. For the first time, they are not scared of them. Just trust. And that's where it pains me the most. Dr. Harrison drops to her side, yanking off his jacket, shoving it against Max's side in an effort to stanch the flow of blood. His voice is urgent. "Emily, we have to move." Emily can't move. Her hands shake as she rubs Max's fur. He had just started to heal. He had finally begun to live. And now, her throat tightens. "Max, stay with me, okay? Just stay with me." His pathetic, virtually non-existent tail thumps once against the pavement. Emily chokes on a sob. Dr. Harrison's voice breaks the moment. "Emily, we need to go." Now. She turns. The man is still moving, dazed, bleeding, yet not done. He puts something out of his coat. Dr. Harrison takes hold of Emily's arm. "Run!" Without a second thought, Emily scoops up Max. She pulls to her feet, his body floppy in her grip. Dr. Harrison pushes the truck door open. "Get in!" Emily barely hears him. Max's weight is too light, too lifeless. She clutches him tighter. "Hold on, baby. Just hold on." Then she dives into the truck. Dr. Harrison floors the gas. Tires screech. The man lurches forward, reaching into his coat. A second gun. Bang! The bullet breaks the rear window. Emily screams. Dr. Harrison swerves. "Get down!" She leaps over Max, protecting him. The truck roars down the road. Another shot. Misses. Another. And then silence. Emily dares to lift her head. The man, a distant shadow in the rearview mirror. Then he's gone. But the real battle, it's just beginning. Emily shakes uncontrollably. Her breath is labored, her fingers drenched in Max's blood. Dr. Harrison's voice is snipping. "Talk to me. How bad?" Emily's throat tightens. It's bad. Her hands go down on Max's wound, but the blood can't stop. His body shudders. Emily loses it. No! Don't you give up on me! Don't you dare! Max's eyes flutter. His breaths shallow, struggling. Emily lets out a broken sob. She was losing him. Dr. Harrison's hands cling to the wheel. "There's an emergency vet 10 miles up. We can make it." Emily clutches Max tighter. "You hear that, buddy? We're almost there." Max's ear twitches. A flicker. A whisper of life. Emily doesn't stop talking. "Stay with me, okay? Just a little longer." She doesn't blink, doesn't breathe, doesn't pray, but begs. And then, the lights of the vet clinic glow up ahead. Hope. Her voice is so thin it is a whisper. "Please, don't die on me." Dr. Harrison flings the door open. "Emily, we have to move." She follows after him as 2 vet techs rush forward, hoisting Max onto a stretcher. Entering are doctors who also examine his lifeless body. Gunshot wound, massive blood loss. He needs a transfusion now. Emily's stomach drops. The doctor's voice is urgent. "We don't have a donor match here. Without one, he won't live to see dawn." Emily's hands tremble. "Not after everything." She turns to Dr. Harrison. "We need to find a match." "Emily, what's wrong?" Emily, breathless. "Max needs blood. We need a donor now." Sarah's eyes widen. "We'll test all of them." One by one, they draw blood. One by one, they test. But the answer is the same each time. Not a match. Emily senses the seconds escaping her. Then, a bark. She turns. A golden retriever Charlie stares at her from his kennel. Sarah hesitates. "We haven't tested him yet." Emily's voice is sharp. "Then do it." The tech draws blood. They wait. 5 seconds. 10. 15. Then, the vet tech's eyes widen. "We have a match." Emily's breath catches. Sarah thrusts the leash into her hands. "Go! Get him there!" Emily doesn't waste a second. She runs. Emily wanted to plow through the doors. "I found a donor." The vet techs hurry Charlie into place and hook up the transfusion line. Emily kneels next to Max, holding his paw. She leans in, whispering, "You're not done yet. You hear me. You fight." A long, unbearable silence. Then, a slow, steady beep. Hope. Her voice trails off to a whisper. "You made it." One tear rolls down her cheek, but not from fear this time. It's relief. Dr. Harrison enters the room, but he looks tired. When he speaks, however, warmth fills his voice. He's stable. He's going to make it. Emily exhales shakily, clutching Max's paw tighter. For the first time in as long as she can remember, the weight pressing down on her ribs is gone. Max had won. 1 week later. His tail wags. Emily speaks with a laugh, despite her tears. "Look at you, buddy." Max halts and glances toward her. Their eyes meet. And in that instant, she knows. All they had fought for, the pain, the fear, the sacrifice, it had all been worth it. Dr. Harrison steps next to her, arms crossed, looking at Max with a slight smile. "You are keeping him, aren't you?" Emily laughs, scrubbing at her face. "As if I wasn't going to anyway." Dr. Harrison nods, his voice lighter than it's been in days. "I figured." Max limps to Emily, his steps unsteady but resolute. And then he nestles his head into her chest. She buries her face into his fur, her heart swelling. "You're home now." For the first time in his life, Max is safe. And he knows it. But what about Callaway? It's over. They, cops, got enough evidence. Your operation is done. Silence. Then a slow smirk. Callaway sits back in his chair, blowing air through his nostrils. This isn't over. Max's story is a story of survival. One of hope. One of second chances. She looks at him, stroking his fur. But the reality is there are thousands of dogs out there like Max. Dogs who were abandoned, hurt, left to fend for themselves. Dogs who are still hoping for a second chance. She faces the camera again, her voice strong. That's what people like you and me and everyone watching get to be. That new person's second chance. The camera moves in even closer, heightening her next sentence. Because every dog should have a home. Every dog deserves love. Her gaze is soft as she looks down at Max. And sometimes, they save us just as much as we save them.